The First Chinese Empire, the Qin Dynasty. During the last 2 centuries of the Zhou dynasty, the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE respectively, the authority of the king became increasingly nominal, and several of the small principalities into which the Zhou kingdom had been divided began to evolve into powerful states and presented a potential challenge to the Zhou ruler himself. Chief among these were Chu in the central Yangtze Valley, Wu in the Yangtze Delta, and Yue along the southern or southeastern coast. Again, that was Chu in the central Yangtze Valley, Wu in the Yangtze Delta, and Yue along the southeastern coast. At first, their mutual rivalries were held in check, but by the 5th century BCE, respectively, competition intensified into civil war, giving birth to the so-called period of the Warring States. Powerful principalities vied with each other for preeminence and largely ignored the now purely titular authority of the Zhou court. Again, from the 5th to the 3rd centuries BCE, China was locked in a time of civil strife known as the period of the Warring States. The Zhou dynasty capital at Yueyang, along with the major states that were squabbling for precedence in the region. When new forms of warfare emerged with the invention of iron weapons and the introduction of the foot soldier. Cavalry, too, made its first appearance, armed with the powerful crossbow. Cities were now threatened by larger and more competent armies. When they sought to protect themselves by erecting high walls, their opponents countered by developing new techniques in siege warfare. Eventually, the relatively young state of Qin. And so I said it was Qin. It is spelled Qin, but it's pronounced Qin. It is located in the original homeland of the Zhou. When the Qin and its state emerged as a key player in these conflicts, by the mid-4th century BCE, the Qin had become a major force in the contest for hegemony in late Zhou China by adopting a number of reforms in agriculture, government administration, military organization, and fiscal policy. As a result of policies put into effect by the advisor Shangyang in the mid-4th century, respectively, Qin society was ruled with ruthless efficiency. In the words of Sima Qian, a famous historian of the Han dynasty, quote, he commanded that the people be divided into tens and fives, and that they supervise each other and be mutually liable. Anyone who failed to report criminal activity would be chopped in two at the waist, while those who reported it would receive the same reward as those for obtaining the head of an enemy. Those who had achievements in the army would be, in proportion, receive an increase in rank in the 20-rank hierarchy in which the empire populace was rated. Those who devoted themselves to the fundamental enterprises and through their farming and weaving contributed much grain and cloth would be remitted from tax and forced labor, while those who worked for peripheral profits in trade and crafts, and those who were idle or poor, would be confiscated as slaves. He equalized the military levies and land tax, and standardized the measures of capacity, weight, and length. End quote. Benefiting from a strong defensive position in the mountains to the west of the Great Bend of the Yellow River, as well as from their control of the rich Sichuan plains, the Qin gradually subdued their main rivals through conquest or diplomatic maneuvering. In the year 221 BCE, the Qin ruler declared the establishment of a new dynasty, their first truly unified government in Chinese history. The Qin dynasty, 221 to 206 BCE. One of the primary reasons for the triumph of the Qin was probably the character of the Qin ruler, known to history as Qin Shi Huangdi, or the first emperor of Qin. A man of forceful personality and immense ambition, Qin Shi Huangdi had ascended to the throne of Qin in 246 BCE at the age of 13. Described by the Han Dynasty historian Sima Qian as having the chest of a bird of prey, the voice of a jackal, and the heart of a tiger, the new king found the legalist views of his advisor Li Su all too appealing. In 221 BCE, Qin Shi Huangdi defeated the last of his rivals, and founded a new dynasty with himself as emperor. After a struggle lasting several decades, the state of Qin was finally able to subdue its rivals and create the first unified empire in the history of China. The capital was located at Xianyang, Xianyang, near the modern city of Yan. The Qin dynasty transformed Chinese politics. Philosophical doctrines that had proliferated during the late Zhao period were prohibited, and legalism was adopted as the official ideology. Those who opposed the policies of the new regime were punished and sometimes executed, while books presenting ideas contrary to the official orthodoxy were publicly put to the torch, perhaps the first example of book burning in history. Legalistic theory gave birth to a number of fundamental administrative and political developments, some of which would survive the Qin and serve as a model for future dynasties of China. In the first place, unlike the Zhao dynasty, the Qin dynasty was a highly centralized state. The central bureaucracy was divided into three primary ministries: a civil authority, a military authority, and a censorate, whose inspectors surveyed the efficiency of officials throughout the system. This would later become standard administrative procedure for future Chinese dynasties. Below the central government, there were two levels of administration: provinces and counties. Unlike the Zhao system, officials at these levels did not inherit their positions, but were appointed by the court and were subject to dismissal at the emperor's whim. Apparently, some form of merit system was used, although there is no evidence that selection was based on performance in an examination. The civil servants may have been chosen on the recommendation of other government officials. A penal code provided for harsh punishments for all wrongdoers, and officials were watched by the censors, who reported directly to the throne. Those guilty of malfeasance in office were executed. Concerning society and the economy, Qin Shi Huangdi, who had a passion for centralization, unified the system of weights and measures, standardized the monetary system, and the written forms of Chinese characters, who also ordered the construction of a system of roads extending throughout the entire empire. He also attempted to eliminate the remaining powers of the landed aristocrats and divided their estates among the peasants, who were now taxed directly by the state. He thus eliminated potential rivals and secured tax revenues for the central government. Members of the aristocratic clans were required to live in the capital city at Xianyang, just north of modern Xi'an, so that the court could monitor their activities. Such a system may not have been advantageous to the peasants in all respects, however, since the central government could now collect taxes more effectively and mobilize the peasants for military service and for various public work projects. The Qin dynasty was equally unsympathetic to the merchants, whom it viewed as parasites. Private commercial activities were severely restricted and heavily taxed, and many vital forms of commerce and manufacturing, including mining, winemaking, and the distribution of salt, were placed under a government monopoly. Qin Shi Huangdi was equally aggressive in foreign affairs. His armies continued the gradual advance to the south that had taken place during the final years of the Zhao dynasty, extending the border of China to the edge of the Red River in modern Vietnam. To supply the Qin armies operating in the area, a canal was dug that provided direct inland navigation from the Yangtze River in central China to what is now the modern day of Guangzhou, or Canton, in the south. Beyond the frontier, the nomadic peoples and the Great Wall. The main area of concern for the Qin emperor, however, was in the north, where a nomadic people, known to the Chinese as the Xiongnu, and perhaps related to the Huns, which we will discuss later, or to the Indo-European speaking people in the area, had become increasingly active, and also in the area of the Gobi Desert. The area north of the Yellow River had been sparsely inhabited since prehistoric times. During the Qin period, the climate of northern China was somewhat milder and moister than it is today, and parts of the region were heavily forested. The local population probably lived by hunting and fishing, practicing limited forms of agriculture or herding animals, such as cattle and sheep. As the climate gradually became drier, people were forced to rely increasingly on animal husbandry as a means of livelihood. Their response was to master the art of riding on horseback and to adopt the nomadic life. Organized loosely into communities consisting of a number of kinship groups, they ranged far and wide in search for pasture for their herds of cattle, goats, or sheep. As they moved seasonally from one pasture to another, they often traveled several hundred miles, carrying their goods in their circular felt tents called yurts. But the new way of life presented its own challenges. Increased food production led to a growing population, which in times of drought outstripped the available resources. Rival groups then competed for the best pastures. After they mastered the art of fighting on horseback, in the middle of the first millennium BCE, territorial warfare became commonplace throughout the entire frontier region, from the Pacific Ocean to Central Asia. By the end of the Zhou dynasty in the 3rd century BCE, respectively, the nomadic Xiongnu had unified many of the groups operating in the region and began to pose a serious threat to the security of China's northern frontier. A number of Chinese principalities in the area began to build walls and fortifications in order to keep them out, but warriors on horseback possessed significant advantages over the infantry of the Chinese. Qin Shi Huangdi's answer to the problem was to strengthen the walls to keep the marauders out. In Sima Qian's words, quote, "The first emperor of the Qin dispatched Ming Qian to lead a force of 100,000 men north to attack the barbarians. He seized control of all the land south of the Yellow River and established border defenses alongside it, constructing 44 walled district cities overlooking the river and manning them with convict laborers transported to the border for garrison duty. Thus, he utilized the natural mountain barriers to establish the border defenses, scooping out the valleys and constructing ramparts and building installations at other points where they were needed. The whole line of defenses stretched over 10,000 li. A li is 1/3 of a mile. So it's over 10,000, 1/3 of a mile. 1/3 of a mile. It extended across the Yellow River and through Yangshan and Peijia. Today, of course, we know Qin Shi Huangdi's project as the Great Wall of China, which extends nearly 4,000 miles from the sandy waste of Central Asia to the sea. It was one of the great wonders, the top 10 wonders of the ancient world, and is one of the top 100 wonders of the world today. It is constructed of massive granite blocks, and its top is wide enough to serve as a roadway for horse-drawn chariots. Although the wall that appears in most photographs at the present time, it was built the present wall today, many photographs that you see now, was built 1,500 years after the Qin, during the Ming Dynasty. And some of the walls built by the Qin remain standing, however. Their construction was a massive project that required the efforts of thousands of laborers, many of whom met their deaths, and, according to legend, they are buried there within the walls. The fall of the Qin. The legalist system put in place by the first emperor of Qin was designed to achieve maximum efficiency as well as total security for the state. It did neither, however. Qin Shi Huangdi was apparently aware of the dangers of factions within the imperial family and established a class of eunuchs, or castrated males, who served as personal attendants for himself and female members of the royal family. The original idea may have been to restrict the influence of male courtiers, and the eunuch system later became a standard feature of the Chinese imperial system. But as confidential advisors to the royal family, eunuchs were in a position of influence. The rivalry between the inner imperial court and the outer court of bureaucratic officials led to tensions that persisted until the end of the imperial system. By ruthlessly gathering control over the empire into his own hands, Qin Shi Huangdi had hoped to establish a rule that, in the words of Sima Qian, would be enjoyed by his sons for 10,000 generations. In fact, his centralizing zeal alienated most and many key groups. Landed aristocrats and Confucian intellectuals, as well as the common people, groaned under the censorship of thought and speech, harsh taxes, and forced labor projects. He killed men, recounted the historian, as though he thought he could never finish. He punished men as though he were afraid he never would get around to them all, and the whole world revolted against him. Shortly after the emperor died in the year 210 BCE, the dynasty descended into factional rivalry, and 4 years later, it was overthrown. The disappearance of the Qin brought an end to an experiment in absolute rule that later Chinese historians would view as a betrayal of humanistic Confucian principles. But in another sense, the Qin system was a response, though somewhat extreme, to the problems of administering a large and increasingly complex society. Although later rulers would denounce legalism and enthrone Confucianism as the new state orthodoxy, in practice they would make use of a number of the key tenets of the legalist ideology, in order to administer the empire and control the behavior of their subjects, which we discuss later. Are all hydraulic societies despotic? Thus, the Qin dynasty's single-minded effort to bring about the total regimentation of Chinese society left a mixed legacy for later generations. Some observers, notably the China scholar Karl Wittfogel, have speculated that the need to establish and regulate a vast public irrigation network, as had been created in China under the Zhou dynasty, led naturally to the emergence of a form of Oriental despotism that would henceforth be applied in all such hydraulic societies. Recent evidence, however, disputes this view, suggesting that the emergence of strong central government followed, rather than preceded, the establishment of a large irrigation system, which often began as a result of local initiatives rather than as a product of central planning. The preference for autocratic rule is probably better explained by the desire to limit the emergence of powerful regional landed interests and maintain control over a vast empire.